Hello, everyone. So you have a couple of choices. You can either go speaker view to get me full screen. I'm going to be swapping between myself and a little presentation, so you'll have some visuals on screen at the same time. In my day-to-day role, I work for Youth Christ International. I train youth workers, more often not to how to become, in essence, YouTubers. I see you guys pretty much as just a slightly more experienced set of youth workers that have moved from youth into grown-ups. But I expect that you have the same kind of skill set in the fact that you are geared for working alongside people, not necessarily for working alongside media. I know that some of you are experienced in media, and we're all at different journeys along the way. So we're going to talk about best practices, our professional approach. We're going to talk about, oh, hang on a second. Before I do that, I better go, yeah, best practices, stress-free streaming. We're going to talk about digital insights. We're going to talk about why do we even do this? Premier Live versus streaming live. Browser versus software versus hardware solutions when we come to make an informed decision. We're going to talk about some technical stuff. We're going to get a little bit technical, and then we're going to do a great big Q&A at the end, okay? I'm going to load a whole lot of information into 18 minutes, and I'm just going to hit start on my timer to keep an eye on the time so that you can see it's going in the background. 42 minutes of questions and answers, because I'm going to throw information at you. You're going to have an awful lot of questions that you either want answering or you just want a bit of clarification. So I'm going to start off by saying, why do we even want to do this? Why are we even streaming? What is the purpose of streaming? Well, for me, it's about worship. It's about making sure that our congregation can still come together and they can worship together. We want to keep our community able to remain connected in some way so they still feel that they are together. We want to have some form of real-time participation, so we might choose to use Zoom in some way, shape, or form. Or we want real-time viewing. The difference between real-time participation and real-time viewing is that in Zoom, like in this environment, we can see each other, we're all there in real time. Real-time viewing might be that we present and a congregation watch. But then ultimately at the same time, we want them to be able to watch again, to be able to come back to the stream, to be able to, and it's not necessarily come back at a time that's convenient to them, but they can share their experience, they can share the online experience. The thing is, for us, it's very strange, because we got to figure out and make an informed decision about how we're going to actually do this. Because is it going to be pre-recorded? Is it going to be a premiere? Or is it going to be live? And what are the elements that are required? We need a countdown, we need a welcome, we need a worship, we need a message. We've got to put in prayers, we've got to put in a reading. And ultimately, at some point, everybody also wants to have coffee and be together at the same time. When we started on this journey, certainly from my perspective, we had to figure out what it is that we were going to do. I have somewhat of an advantage because I've kind of done this kind of stuff before. So on the first time that we came to live stream, there was myself and Phil in church, and Phil will probably remember that I had my 2 cameras, I had my hardware switcher, I had my live encoder, I had everything ready, cables and bits and pieces, I had the assets loaded in, everything was there and it was ready, and we were ready to go live. The only thing that we hadn't realized was that the internet at church wasn't actually able to cope with our live stream. So we're counting down, we're getting ready, everything's laid out, best plans are there, and all of a sudden, nothing worked. I ended up getting out my mobile phone, pressing Facebook Live on my phone, and standing like that for the whole service, just moving around as Phil was doing the service. The best laid plans can be absolutely solid, but there's always that one thing that kicks in, and you've got to have a plan B. Now, we can't always have a plan B, but my plan, I mean, the phone and walking around was probably plan D, after I tried to mobile hotspot my phone and done all the other bits and pieces possible, and then gone, no, it's got to be my phone. And Phil just did his thing. He led worship. He was at the front. He did all the bits and pieces. So the thing is, what we're wrestling with is we're wrestling with the presenter experience and the user experience, because the presenter experience needs to be uncluttered and unflustered. Phil is presenting to a wider community, to the congregation at home, so it needs to be that it doesn't come across like there's problems. Oh, hang on a second, while we just, you really want to be as unflustered as you can. So one of the important things is try not to be the person who's both pressing the buttons and presenting. Try and have at least two people involved in it. So one can be pressing the buttons and the other can present. So one person can be focused on what's going on, what they're talking about, all the things that are happening. And then the button presser, when there's a problem, when a stream doesn't work or something like that, can focus on pressing the buttons and getting everything right. A typical service for us kind of looks like this. We have a combination of live and pre-recorded elements, okay? So the live setup has, for us, 2 computers, a hardware switcher. It has stream keys because we go off to multiple platforms. So we have the countdown, the welcome, some notices, the worship, confession, all of those things. There are 21 elements that make up a Sunday morning at St. Andrews. At various times, different bits are recorded. So sometimes the sermon will be recorded, sometimes the sermon will go live, sometimes the prayer's recorded, sometimes the prayers will go live. The only thing that's pre-recorded every single week at the moment is worship. So, but we've also figured out a way that we can put words on screen in real time. So when Phil leads the confession and absolution and does Holy Communion, that's done live through Zoom, and then the words are just put up as a lower third in real time using, I use Apple, so I use Keynote. The user experience and the presenter experience are really important. So we use Zoom to hold everything together. So all the participants are in Zoom, and I pin them to the second screen because we're using a 2-camera setup with a capture card that allows me to be able to treat the second computer as a second monitor. So I can see everybody, everybody can see me. When we go from something that's pre-recorded, ready to go live, I can then give the presenter a thumbs up so they know that it's time to go live, and then I switch to them. The pre-recorded elements are just sat in Keynote or PowerPoint if you're on Windows. It gives you the ability to have all of the things queued up and ready to go, and then all I do is switch between Zoom and the presenter, so that I'm able, between Keynote and the presenter as the different elements are. I've also found a very cheeky way of being able to send a multi-view. So OBS Studio that I use and the ATM Mini Pro, which I'll talk about later, have a multi-view function. So everybody who's participating in the call can also see if they're live, if they're queued up, and what's going on. I'll talk a little bit more about software, hardware, and browser-based solutions because it really helps make you helps you make an informed decision about the solution you're going to use or the solution you might want to move from to. We also restream, so we're on 2 platforms at the same time. We're on YouTube and we're on Facebook simultaneously in real time. So it's really important that we can also monitor the feeds as well. So I have browser windows open with YouTube and Facebook, I'm monitoring questions that are coming in. I'm monitoring the feed to make sure everything's live. It's really interesting though, because as people join at different points in the service, whether in which platform that they're on, they enter into one of these. They're either watching in real time, they're viewing in real time, or they're catching up and they're watching behind. I think it's really, really important, and this is more from a congregational, from a community perspective. I feel it's really important that if you are live streaming, that there is an individual who is there in real time. We ask our church body, our community, to come together and turn up on a Sunday morning to our church services by having somebody live there greeting them, even if there are both pre-recorded and live elements. You can be responsive if something goes wrong. We don't necessarily do shout outs and greet everybody, but we do acknowledge that we're there live, and I mean, it's really fun when you see people interacting with each other, especially when we come to the peace, everyone's saying peace be with you, when the prayers and people are saying great prayers, can we pray for, and commenting on the worship. We know that we're all there in real time. But the strange thing is, to get to that real-time experience and to make an informed decision about how we create the assets, how we stream the assets, and what we do, we have this thing which is browser-based versus software-based versus hardware-based. Now, browser-based live streaming is the likes of BeLive, StreamYard, and Restream. You open up your computer, you typically use your computer's webcam, and everything you need is contained within a web browser. You open Safari, Internet Explorer, Chrome. Typically, all of these things ask that you use Chrome because that's the one that works best. And you have a series of tools that allow you to stream, present, and also bring in guests by sending them a link and clicking a button. Browser-based solutions are among the easiest, but typically the ones that are good cost money. Not if it's free, it generally has branding and logos and other bits and pieces. As you grow out of that, you move into software-based. Now, software-based, you download an application, be it Zoom, Ecamm, Wirecast, OBS, and there are lots of different ones. They typically have the ability to schedule different scenes. So you can have a welcome, you can have all the different elements. So for us, the 29 elements that make up a service, you could have them in a sequence of 1 to 21 elements. And then for each one, when you press next, that element will come up on screen, giving you a lot more control. But it does mean a lot of the time with the software-based ones, you have to start adding little bits of hardware like capture cards and other bits and pieces. The thing is, as we move from browser-based and we outgrow it to go to software-based, ultimately we end up overlapping into the hardware. And the hardware is things like a capture card, whether it's a small capture card or an ATM Mini Pro, which is one of the things that I'm generally going to be recommending as a church that people start investing in, because it's an all-in-one solution. Because typically in the church setting, we'll be using our sound desk to bring in our audio feed, whereas in the home situation, we're having to add microphones and be very mindful of the sound in our environment. One of the things about sound, which I do say a lot, is I have this thing called the rule of poke. And the rule of poke basically says, if I can reach out and touch the microphone, which I can do right now, then that is a good distance to be away from your camera. If you're more than an arm length away from the microphone on your camera, then you're genuinely not going to get good sound. And you'll see in a lot of situations, if you've watched streaming services, where the further back and the more echo is in the room, the harder it is to understand what people are saying. People will forgive bad video, but typically they won't forgive bad audio. So the better you can get your audio, the clearer you can get it, the better. So our live stream kind of looks very strange. We're looking at various software solutions that we're going to need to use. We're going to have to start adding hardware and other bits and pieces. Because if I just go back a few slides to here, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build up a timeline within our service so that the user experience is smooth and uncluttered, even though, like for me, I'm running 3 computers just through Zoom. I've got a TV panel, an audio panel, I've got a little microphone over here, and all of these different bits and pieces, just so that I can be interactive within a Zoom call, so that I don't have to share screen and your experience is uncluttered as I switch between my presentation and my camera. Let me skip ahead. I got 4 minutes left. I'm doing quite well. Technical stuff. One of the things that I suppose we don't talk a lot about is the true technical side of things. We are using various bits of hardware. We're adding stuff to our computers. We're adding, as we outgrow the camera on our laptop, I suppose just to say, so on our laptop we have a reasonable camera, but it automatically adjusts. It's like the camera on your phone. I'm using a DSLR plugged in so that it doesn't adjust. I have control of my focus, my exposure, my ISO, so I can ensure that you get the best viewing experience with good sound as we're doing this presentation. We want our congregation to have the same. So ultimately it does mean adding a simple capture device or a complex capture device to get in audio and video, to then connect that to our software to be able to present it out. So we end up with a very smooth transition from our countdown through to our coffee time. One of the big things that people often ask is, how do I go from just a software or browser-based onto multiple platforms? Well, with our browser-based, they often have the ability to select multiple platforms, and the more money or the higher level of subscription service you have, the more platforms you can actually connect to. I use a restreaming service. So I use something called Castar to take a single feed and to be able to recast it across multiple platforms. When we set up YouTube and Facebook, we give in stream keys, the keys that allow us to connect directly to that platform and allow us to send our feed. So I take the stream keys that go for Castar, so I send one signal to Castar, and then it restreams to all the different platforms. It also allows me to then connect to different groups and multiple pages. And I know that for our congregation, for our audience, we have very much a 60-40 split. So we generally have 60% of our audience on Facebook and 40% of our audience on YouTube. For each person that's on, I typically count them as a household, and each household on average is 2.5 people. So we typically get around about 80 people turning up for church on a Sunday, and we can calculate what the actual attendance is from that. We don't necessarily count anything after that is a view, but we only use the figures from people turning up in real time on a Sunday morning. I've got 59 seconds left because we're then going to move on to the questions and answers. One of the things I will say is that I'm very used to finding very cheap solutions to do very complicated things. And you guys as a team will be on a very, very steep learning curve. Some of you I've seen have done amazing things. Other of you are just completely frustrated by the process that you're in. And I know that all of us are on a completely new journey as we look to equipping our churches in how to continue engaging our audience. And the important thing is, how do we give our our audience, our congregations, a similar user experience when we move back into churches and start streaming to this experience that they've had whilst they've been online? And that's going to be one of the biggest challenges. Time up for me. let's have some questions. Oh, wrong button. Done.
Right, so Martin, we haven't got any questions in the chat yet. So if anyone wants to add some questions in there now, but I have got some questions that have already come in when people signed up. So if we want to start with those, I think Andrew Fowler, you added one onto your sign up. Would you like to ask that to Martin directly? It's about camera angles, isn't it?
Yeah, it was simply that we're just about to go to live streaming next Sunday at MCC, and we have 2 static cameras to start with. And I was just interested to see what the angles would be recommended for those two cameras. And we've got people who've decided already, but I thought it'd be just an interesting question to get from Martin.
If you do have 2 cameras available to you, then a wide and a tight shot are generally the preferred shots. If one camera can be manned, so you can have a following tight shot, and then the safety of a wide shot as well, are generally the 2 preferred shots in live streaming. And then the ability to switch between the 2, and the ability, because if you're then live streaming out to a wider audience, the third angle being whatever is on screen, being able to bring that in and push that out at the same time.
Thank you.
That was a nice, easy question.
So
I was just going to say, I suppose then skipping over to one of the other questions, there's a couple of questions on live streaming content and copyright.
yeah, I was just about to ask that one. So yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? There's a few people wanting to know, what do we do about including music? What's the copyright thing? What notices do we need to include in our YouTube, or information below? Yeah, tell us about that.
So that's a really interesting one. One of the first things you need to do is to upgrade your CCL licenses to include streaming online. It's not hugely expensive, but it's really important to understand the kind of very nuances, the things in there. So we're permitted to create karaoke versions of worship. So what we can't do is we can't even use a backing track. In theory, you can't download the backing track for the Wren Collective, My Lighthouse. You would actually have to purchase a karaoke version and then use that, or have your worship band create a version with their own instruments. When you broadcast out a karaoke version that's not using copyrighted purchased material, then your CCL license covers you for that. What it doesn't cover for, so a few weeks ago, we were going to show the UK Blessing video, but because that's a copyrighted video, even though it's on YouTube for public access, as soon as you include it in your own stream and publish it as your own content, you're claiming, because when you go to live stream, it says, is all the media that you're about to publish owned by you, created by you, and you have permission to use it? If the answer to any of those questions is no, then the person who owns the copyrights, that might be the music house, the publisher, whoever it is, or the songwriter, has the ability to put a copyright claim in on your content. They can then put, they can monetize your video on YouTube. So what you could find is that you put out a song, you've used a backing track, or you include a video, and suddenly there's a 30 or 60-second non-skippable advert on your content because the copyright is owned by somebody else, and then they have permission to then monetize their content through your platform. So where possible, create your own stuff as much as possible. And if you really need to use it, don't include it as within your stream, but provide a link to it for people to be able to watch it afterwards, or a link in the description.
Okay, so and in terms of video then, that if you wanted to include some kind of video into it, that say it's a reading or anything like that, what about copyright from in that respect? If it's a video that's already on YouTube and you want to just add that into your stream, is that allowed?
That's not allowed. So if it's a it's published on somebody else's channel, with permission, you can. So if there was something on YouTube and you reached out to the person who owns that copyright, owns that content, and said, we would love to include that in our Sunday service, in our presentation, could we have permission to use it? And they said yes. All you'd have to then do is put a credit to the person at the end or at the bottom of the video to reflect that the content came from them. We showed a Frontline Sunday video and Sunday Just Gone, and when you let the video run right to the end, it has the web URL of where you can watch the video and where the video came from. So it's important that if you have permission to use things, that you still include the source of where it came from and how people can access that and more information going forwards.
Thank you. So Ruth Donegan Cross, I think you've got a few questions. So would you like to ask your questions to Martin direct?
They're guys' questions.
Ah.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Martin. I think Jay's question is similar, actually. Hi, Jay. It's about the best card for connecting a SLR camera to a computer for live streaming. And also, you know, you've given out a lot of information there, Martin, about the Cascar, I think it was, you know.
Yeah.
Is there a sort of summary of all those different technical things that we need to think about?
There will be. We'll be putting out some similar. So one of the things we're going to be doing between now and September is almost doing like a countdown to launch. And I'm going to create a bunch of links and little videos on the individual elements that I've mentioned, because it's a big fat information blast all at the same time. I described it to Sam and Janet as, in my childhood, we used to press record on the VCR while the information blast, and then you'd go forward frame by frame. That's often the way that my brain works. Unfortunately, we just have to unpack it slightly. So capture cards is a very interesting one, because you can go from, I was just going to reach for one of my capture cards and plug both in. So I've recently found that there is a capture card you can buy, HDMI capture card. Let me just find it here. I've got it pictured on one of these, and I'll put a link to it. Let me just hit play on this. So there are a couple of different capture cards out there. There's one in particular, a little HDMI video capture card, and I'll put a link to it. You get it from Amazon. It costs £11, and I'm using it right now. I'm using an £11 capture card to take a stream from a video panel directly into my computer, because the issue with a lot of capture cards is that they're designed for streaming directly to YouTube, directly to Twitch, and they're aimed at the gamer market. What we often want to do is we just want to take our DSLR camera, we just want to connect into the side via a HDMI, and then plug it into the computer so we can get this, you know, ability to change the focus and the shallow depth of field with different lenses and things like that, and lock the exposure. However, capture cards are very expensive at the moment. I've invested in some additional cards, but the Blackmagic ones for my computer, secondhand, they start at £200. The video industry is a very expensive industry. Technology that is reliable is expensive. My £11 capture card is great, but I would worry about using it for something over a longer period of time that was essential. I can get away with a 1-hour service quite easily. And at £11, you could probably buy a couple, and then you could plug 2 of them into your computer via USB and plug 2 cameras in and have the ability to switch between cameras. OBS Studio is the piece of software that is free and gives you the ability to plug multiple devices in and then stream out. It's a very reliable, but it requires quite a significant learning curve to get it going. I've even tried some of the intermediately priced ones. So we purchased one, I think it was £69, which was supposed to work very well. But we could get a feed from the camera, but we couldn't actually connect it to Zoom or to Skype or anything like that. It would only stream directly to YouTube. So there are various options out there, and they are all budget specific. I was asked, I suppose, similarly about an all-in-one device. Is there one device that does everything? And there's only one device that I know of that does everything. Is it hanging up there? And that's a camera called a Mevo. It's a 4K camera. It's absolutely tiny, and it creates 9 virtual cameras, and it can stream live, and it can connect to an external audio device. The disadvantage is they're about £1,000 at the moment because of it's a tiny little bag, and the camera's about this big. Sam's just currently looking for it. She's found the battery pack for it, so we found the battery pack, but the camera is a tiny thing that sits on the front. The other thing that I'm recommending at the moment is the Blackmagic ATM Mini Pro, because it has the camera switcher, the audio monitoring, the recording, the encoding, and the broadcast all in one unit. So you have the ability for around about £550 to buy a unit that all you have to do is plug in your cameras, plug in a laptop for your presentation, plug in a feed from your sound desk, and you're away. Don't worry, we haven't found it. It's very organized behind me. In front of me, it's just absolute chaos. Guy, did that answer your question?
Yeah, what's a video panel?
So I've got, a video panel is basically a panel that you connect multiple devices in. So I've got something called an ATEM TVS, which gives me the ability to connect 6 video sources in. And typically for me, there are 2 cameras and 2 laptops that allow me then to mix, so like I've got one laptop over here, putting my presentation up, and then I've got a video feed in from. So that looks like, let me just go back on present. So that is this thing. So you've got the black box with the buttons is a hardware switching, a video switcher, video panel, that when you click on one of the buttons, camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, camera 4, it does picture-in-picture. It also allows you to directly stream live, as well as monitor all the audio and all the feeds that are coming in.
Is that not the same as the ATM then, that you talked about? Have we gone off? Does it sound well?
I don't know.
Have we lost him?
I think we've lost his sound.
I'm not sure. I think Martin's there. He's just perhaps needs to switch back to.
I think his technology broke down.
It is because all of my technology is. I'm back now. Because all of my technology is battery powered. Because everything I do is in the field. I've now switched to a desktop solution where all of a sudden my battery powered stuff, I'm constantly on charge. So it's that really interesting thing that even for me, I've still got to be adapting with batteries and bits and pieces. I'm back.
So that video panel, Jay said it's the same as the ATM Mini Pro. That's what you mean by video panel.
That is exactly it.
Yeah.
And there's 2 versions. There's the Mini and the Mini Pro. The Mini's $325. The Pro is $550. But the Pro has more features and the ability to connect directly to Facebook, YouTube, or a restreaming service all in the one box, and connect 4 devices via HDMI to it.
Thanks very much.
Okay, so there's a question from Andy Wilson. Andy, do you want to ask that direct to Martin? It's about OBS Studio.
Yeah, so I'm an imposter having left Harrogate, but it was just a question, Martin, about OBS Studio, whether or not you can use that to send a live thing of whatever you're doing straight to a Facebook page and YouTube at the same time.
So with OBS Studio, you can send it to one location at a time. So you can choose whether to send it to Facebook or to YouTube, or Twitch or anything else. That's where the stream keys come in. So you would use, Castar and Restream are the two most popular restreaming services. So what you do in OBS Studio in the stream settings is you would put the stream key and the RMTP address, your server address, into OBS Studio, and it's the same with most of the other ones as well. That then connects to your restreaming service, which is Restream or Castar, and then you put into Castar, you create a list. If I just go back to the screen that shows that, it then creates a list for you. So there I've got Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram on screen. So in the bottom right-hand side, it says, it's got the stream key and the server address that I connect my OBS Studio to, and then I'll do the individual stream keys for Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, so that then I can then simultaneously push the content from OBS Studio directly to each of those three platforms independently. And so it comes in natively to those platforms, not shared through another platform. And you can connect up to 30 different platforms and just send the one feed through to it. Super easy, guys.
There's a great question from Brian about which camera to choose. There's so many on the market, isn't there? If we were just about to start to stream, what would you recommend would be the best camera, or where to start? What should we look for?
Great question. There are so many cameras on the market, and again, at the moment, we're at a time when all video hardware has taken a little bit of an increase in price. First of all, work out what it is you actually want to do. Are you going to be, if you're going to be inside, and from your home streaming, and you're going to be doing that kind of a setup, then I would say go for some kind of DSLR or mirrorless camera. Pick something cheap. The most important feature for it to have, well, there are two important features. One is something called clean HDMI outputs. When you plug a HDMI cable into the side of your camera, is the output that comes from it clean? And clean means that it has no additional display features on it. So my video camera at the moment, you don't see the battery indicator, or you don't see any of the additional bits and pieces. That's called a clean HDMI. Old Nikon cameras, so like the D31, 3200, and the 5200, all do clean output. So do things like the Sony 5100s and through those ranges. I've got one handy somewhere, or maybe not. Just tiny little mirrorless cameras. You can do it with like a Sony HV90 or something like that, something that's incredibly small. No, it's none of those, probably in that box. I tidied my office and put everything in boxes. So cleaning HDMI. The other one is, for me, interchangeable lenses. Get something with an interchangeable lens. So then so I'm using a 16mm lens on a Sony a6400 at the moment. And I can reach out and I can touch my camera and touch the lens on it. But I've got that nice wide field of view. It's okay, Sam. I've got that nice wide field of view at the same time. But on this one, if I'm doing something, I got a 35mm on here, and then I've got a zoom. So if I wanted to get something that was further away, I could do. The disadvantage of things like this is the ability to zoom in and out and focus easily. So if you were going to be doing something inside church, I'd look for an old Canon Legria, like a G25 or a G10 or something like that. It gives you the ability to have the controls to zoom in and out that little bit better. And you're able to then plug in the sound from your sound desk and things like that. And yeah, so that's camcorder if you're going to be in church because you need the zooming, and mirrorless or DSLR if you're going to be still inside your house, because then you can attach a widescreen, a prime lens on, and get that nice shallow depth of field. And again, the cameras are super cheap. CEX are a wonderful place to buy secondhand camera equipment, because even when it's an old camera, they still give you a 12-month guarantee. So if anything goes wrong with an old camera for 12 months, you can still take it back and get a replacement.
Okay, so just continuing on the equipment, we've got a question about mics again from Guy, I'm presuming. Do you want to ask that, Guy?
Yeah, so we've got a Rode mic, so like this one. How is that sufficient? And then, you know, you talked about this 11 quid card. You talked about plugging that into a video panel and then into the computer. But can I plug my SLR camera, get that 11 quid card, and just plug it straight into the computer and stream through OBS with that?
Yes. So you can take like a little Nikon camera.
Mm-hmm.
You can then just go straight from the HDMI on the side of it just there. You can plug it into the 11 quid capture card. You can stick the Rode mic on top of it, and then you can take the audio and the video through the capture card to stream out to either directly into OBS or straight to Facebook or straight to YouTube. So the answer is yes.
Is that substantially better than an iPhone 11 camera mic, I think?
I would say if your iPhone 11 is following the rule of poke and and it's no more than an arm length away from you, then yes. But an iPhone 11 camera, though an amazing camera, will be automatically adjusting for light and exposure as you're moving around unless you lock the exposure. Unfortunately, you can't live stream and lock the exposure on an iPhone simultaneously. However, you can. OBS Project do a plugin for your iPhone, so you can use your iPhone as an external camera. You then, if you want to, could use an external mic on your, plugged in at the same time. So you can use your iPhone as an external camera with OBS using a plugin, and then, but to then because the iPhone can go wide, you'd still end up being that little bit too far away. So external mic where possible. You can get an adapter for your Rode mic that connects directly into your iPhone. Yeah, and I would recommend getting these kind of breakout cables that convert from a microphone to a mobile phone, but then you still have to get the TRS to lightning cable adapter, but you can plug your Rode into your iPhone.
Yeah, we got that.
Oh, you see, look at that, you've got it.
But what's the 11 quid card called?
Bizarrely, it's just called HDMI video capture.
Okay.
I'll stick a link to it in something on the hub.
Thanks. Brilliant.
So related to that is a question from Martin Harrison, I think, which is a similar kind of question. That's about wirelessly transmitting. So I know there's a little app on, I know that it's on Ecamm Live, and you can make your camera a virtual camera, can't you? So you could use that outside for kind of like separate camera. Martin, do you want to explain what your question is about, Martin Harrison?
Yeah, what I'm thinking is in our church setup, we have two cameras at the moment. One is a wide angle view of the auditorium, and then we have one that's more zoomed in on the podium area where speaker and worship might take place. But down the line, we'd love to get to a situation where we potentially had a mobile camera person inside the building who can walk around and get some more creative angles on the service and send that signal straight to the video panel where it can be put into the live stream.
Yes, very interesting question. So the virtual camera that's in things like Ecamm and many other softwares actually refers to not necessarily a virtual camera that happens outside of the computer, but it allows the camera to virtually connect to software within. So it allows you to connect to Zoom and to Skype and to Google Meet within your computer, as opposed to be remotely off on the computer. The only cheap solution that I found for a wireless camera, because if you want to wirelessly send your signal from your camera through a card, you need to have the video sending devices going backwards and forwards, and it normally takes like a Teradek unit, which is hugely expensive. The other solution is to run something called Reflector 3 on your computer, which allows you to stream your mobile phone's screen directly to your computer through Wi-Fi, which means you can launch a camera app, but bear in mind you have to then use something like Filmic Pro, where you can turn off all the screen display so you have a clean, in essence, HDMI signal, and then you share your screen using AirPlay to the computer. The computer's then plugged into your switcher through HDMI, so whatever you see through the phone then comes through the computer, which then goes into the switcher. However, there's a delay, there's lag, because you're running through typically your public Wi-Fi system, unless you have an independent Wi-Fi system that you can connect those devices to. So yes, it's possible. Yes, it takes a little bit of fun. Reflector 3 is about $15, so it's not particularly expensive, and it's very easy to use. It's not hugely reliable, so if you were relying on it for a feed, then you obviously have to be in good, strong Wi-Fi signal, but it can create some fun. It can create that kind of third point of view camera, where you could then put that onto some form of gimbal, you know, so you can take like a Zion crane type thing, a little gimbal, stick the phone onto it, and then you could wander around church and push out that wireless signal.
But yeah, sounds like quite a bit of fun to set that up, and solving the lag issue would be the key thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, the lag, what's that? Oh, the lag issue is something that you can never get around. So if you're trying to sync audio and video at the same time, you could use it from a point of view perspective camera, but if you like see from the presenter's point of view, but you couldn't necessarily use it from a congregation perspective pointing at, because the delay, the lag would be quite significant.
Thank you.
So Martin, I think you had a bit more to another question, didn't you, about live streaming and participants and turning your live stream off while there was some sensitive information. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to be a common occurrence, and it probably gets more into the whole question of how you design a church service that is functional and effective for members in the congregation in the building, and at the same time is engaging and relates to people who are online. Occasionally, you know, we've had, well, myself, I travel to interesting parts of the world with mission work, and I have details to share that aren't really suitable to be live streamed and up on YouTube forevermore. So sometimes there might be a moment where you want to pause the live stream to at least share with people in the building some information, and then you could resume that afterwards. But that's going to look pretty weird to somebody on YouTube or Facebook Live who's in the middle of a service and all of a sudden you cut them out. I just thought, are there any ways to get around that are cheap, fun, cost effective?
The easiest one is, so your user experience outside of the building has to match the user experience inside the building. So my suggestion for stuff like that is not to just cut the feed, but have an appropriate piece of material that you could show publicly in its place. So if, for example, there is a organizational video that is saved to show about the organization that can be played whilst sensitive stuff is being talked about inside the building, then that's what I recommend. I would also say that when you broadcast live, everybody in the building also needs to be made aware that you are live streaming, and if anybody is uncomfortable, because at any point, if you're moving around with a third camera and you're capturing people, you technically need everybody's consent to be able to put them on YouTube live forever going forward. So sensitive stuff, generally say, don't broadcast it. find something appropriate to put in its place, and make sure that the people you're pointing the camera at are happy to have a camera pointed at them and stuff like that. So that's my kind of advice on that one. And it's just down to then scheduling and being creative and stuff like that. You might not even want to mention that you've got something sensitive that you're going to show. You might just say, and now for some, and now, you know, and now the next thing, you know what I mean? Just introduce something generic, and then everybody watching gets something completely separate, and the people inside get the sensitive stuff.
Yeah. So on the latter point that you just raised there about people in the building who may end up being in the live stream, we were thinking of putting just some notices on the wall, because obviously, you know, we plan to stream forevermore, I think, from this point forwards. So is that an appropriate and adequate solution, to put a notice on the wall to explain to people, you know, as well as perhaps in our emails that go out to the congregation and people?
Yeah, and it's certainly something we need to explore. I mean, because it's new territory. I mean, there are organizations that have been doing this for a long time. When you go to a conference, you know, if you go to New Wine, Soul Survivor, or any of those Spring Harvest type things, there are cameras, and they're typically pointing at the person who's presenting, preaching, praying, and stuff like that. Notices are good, but just a little kind of reminder at the beginning as part of your welcome, you know, welcome visitors, welcome people, thanks for joining us, just to let you know, we are going to be live streaming. If that's something, you know, if you don't want to be captured, unfortunately, you are going to have to sit at the back. Or is it inappropriate for us to then ask people to move further back if they don't want to be on screen? So I think as individual churches, we just need to make a decision about what our policy is. And for us as the Church of England, for the church that I'm in, we will also be heavily consulting those who are making decisions above us to find out what their recommendations are as well.
Thank you.
That was a long answer to a short question.
We've got a question from Mike Proctor about lighting. Mike, is there anything specific you want to know?
Just that something of note in when people are broadcasting from their own front rooms or whatever else is quality of lighting seems to vary enormously. And just moving into the church context and a larger room, the lighting is really set up for broadcasting. So is there anything we should be looking at in terms of lighting in a small room setting, the use of diffuse light, the color rendition of light, changing from one setting to another, trying to make sure lighting is of a similar color mix when flipping from one streaming input to another streaming input, and so on?
Yeah, the short answer and the long answer is, the short answer is that unless you invest significantly in good lighting and good cameras, that is something that unfortunately you're not going to be able to master 100%. My general rules are that most churches are set up in such a way that whoever is at the front is reasonably well lit. I know at St Andrews, we've always had a problem when the lighting goes bad, that the front is very poorly lit, and we've invested in some lighting. Typical LED lights that are industrial are really bad for video. You get a really bad flicker running through your video. The color temperature of lights is also not consistent across lights. So unfortunately, what we have to do is just make the best of a bad situation. So that's making sure that the camera angle is such that you're picking that there isn't a harsh, a strong light source behind that person, so that the camera's not fighting between a very brightly lit window and the subject that you're trying to feature. So moving the camera and selecting an angle so that the light is hopefully shining on them and not illuminating from behind them. In the same way, we may have to look at additional lighting to light up people who are at the front, and also having a camera where you can adjust the ISO and the focus so that you can get that white balance right. And again, it's going to change. If you buy a couple of cheap cameras that are all the same make and use the same color profile, chances are you'll be able to match the colors. But if you're mixing and matching, then you've just got to do your best to try and what we call white balance that particular brand of color to a a neutral color profile so that the colors reasonably match across the board. But it's a real tricky one and does require a lot of time to get to know your equipment and experience in getting it wrong before you get it right. I mean, I'm running a 2-point lighting setup just here for me, with different lights just to illuminate myself here, as well as a backup microphone hanging from a TV monitor stand just in case I need it. So I got redundancy backed in. My lights were all running the same color temperature, but again, at the same time, if I move, I was still getting flicker from the monitor behind me because of the refresh rate of the monitor versus the refresh rate of the camera. It's a fun subject, but typically with a bit of trial and error and fun, you can get around it. And there's always somebody that you can ask to help. There you go. That was a really long answer to a short question.
Just thinking about going back into church buildings, and often we have some words on pictures or slides on the presentation at the front. Should that match what's going out on the streaming? Should they be the same thing? And how do you get around that? How do you have one thing visual up in church, and should that be projected out on a live stream? How's that going to work together?
Well, typically, I would say yes. Whatever your congregation is seeing in the building, your congregation outside of the building should be saying the same thing. It might be the case that you have to use a video splitter to split the signal from your computer. I use these breakout boxes. So I have the ability to take a HDMI signal in, split it off back to a source, but also have a Thunderbolt connection that runs into my computer. So I can collect the video source coming in. So for example, it's a presentation computer, and run it into another computer to broadcast it out. You are going to end up with more computers. A Sunday morning service, for instance, at St. Andrews, I use 3 computers just to run the service. 4th computer because Phil's on his computer, he's at his house. A 5th computer if somebody else is doing something. But in here for me, I'm running 3 computers. 1 putting all the streams together and monitoring, 1 with the Zoom call and 1 with the presentation. And then I have my camera as a backup just in case Phil's internet connection dies towards the end of the service and all of a sudden I've got to step in and do the blessing. But yeah. I'd also say branding's really important as well. It's something that I've, if you've watched any of the Spring Harvest online stuff, you'll notice that all of their all of their segments are all branded. If you check out the St. Andrews YouTube page or Facebook page by going to the page and then clicking on the live or the video button, you'll notice that each individual video has a holding slide that brands it and shows the day, whoever was preaching, the passage that was being used in the title, and they're all themed the same. So there's not like a random collection of thumbnails of different people or of thumbnail taken from. I've very carefully made and then put up the thumbnail that's going to be shown so that consistent branding happens. So it's got our church logo, it's got our Loving and Growing, and it all looks the same. It looks uniform, and it just helps it look nicer. And again, I'd recommend that kind of thing. If you're going to be streaming every week, make your content easy to find and easy to share. So when somebody does find it, they know exactly what it is, and when they do share it and somebody receives it, they know exactly what they're going to watch.
I think you may have covered, oh, hold on, watermarks with logos on for the stream. Martin is saying to put the watermark on in YouTube, I think, can't you? Is that what you're saying?
You can load a logo into YouTube, which will automatically display in the top corner, whichever side it is. If you're using OBS, you can actually put your own logo as a layer that will appear on all streams anyway. Same with Ecamm. All the software ones and the browser-based ones, if you pay the money, allow you to then put your own branding onto it. So you can put your own watermark on if you needed to.
So just touching on that, Martin, if you have a people that have different skill sets, what would you recommend would be the easiest of Ecamm, OBS, that kind of software? Is there something that you particularly think is really user friendly, easy to use, don't need masses of technical knowledge? Yeah, what would you advise?
So Ecamm is a Mac only piece of software. $15 and $20 are the two different tiering of prices per month. £11 and £16. It's really user friendly. The thing I love about that is there's something called NDI, which is how one piece of software virtually talks to another piece of software. It's available in OBS, you've just got to plug it in. But with an Ecamm, it allows you to have a Skype call, and then you can bring different people on the screen and it displays them all at the bottom. So if you want to have 3 or 4 people join you, you can just click them, and by launching Ecamm and Skype, it just automatically, they just talk to each other. You just got to enable the NDI in the settings in your call, and OBS does that. So from an ease perspective, Ecamm is really good, but it's Mac only. The closest equivalent to Ecamm for Windows is vMix, and that's quite expensive. Restream, which is a browser-based one, now has the ability to bring guests in as well as connect to your web camera. Of all of the browser-based ones, I think BeLive is the one that is the most feature-packed, easy to use, and clutter-free. And people seem to be using that quite efficiently. The other one I've seen people using is StreamYard. The browser-based ones like BeLive have those additional features to bring images and bits and pieces in, whereas things like StreamYard and Restream, you have to then plug external video capture devices to create the content to bring it in. So it's down to technical ability, time available to you, and what you need to achieve versus what you can achieve.
So I think we've had all of the questions in the chat. Is there anybody, do you want to put your hand up if you want to say anything, or just turn yourself off mute and ask Martin directly? Any burning questions? You've covered everything, Martin.
Excellent. It's just a wonderful, oh yeah, that's going to say, I did warn him. So Phil, I'll let him unmute himself.
Hello.
Very quickly, from your perspective, from being on the other side of the camera. So I've talked a lot about the kind of the steam engine driving it. You've been at the vicarage remotely, joining and being on the other side of it. So how have you found, what's your experience been?
Well, obviously it's a huge blessing to have somebody like Martin in your congregation, who when suddenly a global epidemic hits and you have to go and do church in a very different way, he says, oh, it's fine, I'll do all this and da-da-da. So it's made it obviously a lot easier for me, because I can then focus on what I'm saying and praying and leading, rather than having to think about switching between cameras and is my laptop working and how's the sound and, you know, how's this person going to come in and do the prayers in a second, because I know that Martin's kind of down the road doing it all. So yeah, from my point of view, it's just been obviously a real blessing and a real help to have Martin doing that stuff. I guess I would have been able to kind of press go on a Facebook Live or something, but I wouldn't have been able to do all the stuff we're doing, because like everybody else, it's a huge learning curve. And I think for some people, they love all the tech and getting into it and getting all the equipment, and for others, it's just not what they want to be spending their time doing and not where their experience or expertise is. So yeah, it's been a huge blessing to have that going on in the background. Yeah, and certainly everyone's very appreciative of it. I think the only thing we didn't really touch on is that after we've done our service, which normally lasts about an hour, is that we then head on to Zoom and do the kind of coffee time in that context, because obviously our service is going out on Facebook and YouTube. There's a little bit of interaction in that people can write in the comments, but the main kind of sense of being a family comes after the service at 11 o'clock when we all meet on Zoom and have a chat.
We've also started doing dial-in to Zooms for those who don't have the internet and things like that. So we run now 2 Zoom calls. So we have the main Zoom call that everyone connects to me on, but then we have another person that connects a separate Zoom call and then we publish the number so people can dial into that, and then they've got a phone and a computer next to each other, so that the audio from the service that's being broadcast live can then be listened to in real time via Zoom. We have a few people that access that, but it's just a real blessing to be able to offer that real-time dial-in service, as well as we have the YouTube and Facebook service. Yeah, all things are possible. It's just having the people and the technology available to make them happen.
Yeah.
And then working out if you want to pay for it or not. So unless, as always, I can continue to talk forever, but I think we're getting to a point whereby, are there any more questions?
I think now might be a good time for us to wrap up then. I think the questions are drying up. But what we did talk about before we went live with this was that we want to be able to keep the dialogue going, but in a way that's sustainable for Martin. So it's not very helpful for him to have lots and lots of people asking him lots of random questions every week for months to come. So what we thought we'd do is, if you have got ongoing questions, or you try things and you're having difficulties, or you suddenly think of a question that didn't come to mind today, then email Janet or myself, either of us, and we'll share those questions with Martin. And what Martin's going to do is do lots of little kind of videos that he'll post on his YouTube channel with all the answers to these questions. And we'll also provide a link to those on social media, so it's easy for everybody to find. We'll also put a copy of this recording as well on social media, so that people who weren't here today can find it too. So hopefully that way, any other questions that you have can be answered that way instead. So I just want to take this opportunity to say a massive thank you to Janet for asking those questions so brilliantly, and just really moderating the whole time for us. So thank you, Janet. And of course, thank you to Martin for just all your expertise and your willingness to share that with us. So that we're all better equipped to do our jobs, especially in this time when everything seems to be changing even more so than it was before. So yeah,
absolutely.
So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Janet.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Really good.
Thanks for listening. You've been very patient.